The snow had been falling since noon, soft and indifferent, the way it always fell in Helena in the deep months of winter. By nightfall, it had buried the garden, swallowed the stone path, and pressed itself against the lower windows of the Hartwell house like something trying to get in. Ellie sat on the window seat in her bedroom on the second floor, her knees pulled to her chest, her breath fogging the cold glass. She was 6 years old and small for her age, with dark brown eyes that had a way of taking in more than most people expected. She pressed one finger against the glass and drew a heart. It disappeared before she could finish the second side. Downstairs, her mother's voice moved through the empty hallways like water through pipes, low and constant, and going nowhere Ellie could follow. A conference call, another one, the third this evening, Ellie had counted. She hugged her stuffed bear tighter. His name was Captain, and he was missing one eye and had been loved nearly flat over 6 years of sleeping and crying and being dragged through the world. He was the most honest thing in the house. The bedroom around her was enormous and filled with things chosen by other people. A canopied bed with silk pillows and dusty rows. A dollhouse the size of a small refrigerator furnished down to tiny silver spoons. Shelves of books organized by color rather than story. None of it had ever felt like hers. It all felt like a display, something arranged to be admired from a distance, which was how most things in this house worked. Ellie slid off the window seat and went to her desk. She opened the second drawer, the one that stuck, and looked at the paper she had hidden there 3 days ago. She had found it in her mother's office when she went looking for tape to fix Captain's ear. It had been sitting on the printer face up, as if no one had thought to hide it from a 6-year-old. She could not read all of it, but she could read some. She had always been good at reading. Her teacher, Mrs. Paulson, said she read like a much older child, which Ellie had not known was something to be proud of until Mrs. Paulson said it. The words she could read were enough. Dissolution of marriage. Final agreement. Regarding the minor child, Eleanor Hartwell petitioner waives all custodial rights and declines visitation. She had looked up waives and declines on the tablet her mother had given her for educational apps. She understood what they meant. Her father did not want to see her. He had written it down and signed it with his name, Senator Gareth Hartwell, which was how his name appeared on television and on the sign outside his office in the Capitol building. Not Dad, not Daddy, Senator Gareth Hartwell. Ellie put the paper back in the drawer and closed it carefully. She sat on the edge of the bed for a while. Captain watched her from the pillow. Downstairs, her mother laughed at something someone on the phone had said. It was her professional laugh, the short one. Ellie had learned the difference years ago. She thought about going downstairs. She had done that before, had stood in the doorway of her mother's office in her pajamas, and her mother had held up one finger. Just 1 minute, sweetheart, and then the minute had turned into 20, and Ellie had gone back to bed alone. She thought about calling her father, but she did not have his new number. He had gotten a new phone after he moved to the apartment in Billings, and the number she had memorized did not work anymore. She had tried it on a Tuesday from the landline in the kitchen, and a recorded voice had told her it was not in service. What Ellie understood slowly and completely, the way children understand things that adults spend years avoiding, was that she was alone. Not in the way of being left in a room, in the way of being left in a life. She stood up. She went to her closet and found her warmest coat, the dark green one with the hood. She put on 2 pairs of socks and her waterproof boots that her mother had bought for a ski trip they had not taken. She found her mittens on the shelf and her knit hat with a small palm on top. She tucked Captain inside her coat so his head was just at her chin. She did not write a note. She had considered it, but she did not know what to say that the empty house would not say better without her in it. The back stairs were the quiet ones. She had known that since she was 4. She took them slowly and went through the kitchen, past the bowl of fruit no one ate, past the coffee maker that ran on a timer every morning for a mother who was always already on calls, and she opened the back door. The cold hit her like a hand pressed flat against her face. She walked into it anyway. The backyard stretched wishy and white. The security lights at the corners of the house threw long yellow cones across the snow, and Ellie moved through them quickly and then into the dark beyond where the lawn gave way to the low fence at the property's edge. and then to the open field that ran toward the tree line 300 yards out. She climbed through the fence the way she had done in summer on days when the nanny was on her phone, and Ellie wanted to look for deer tracks along the creek. The metal railing was cold through her mittens. The snow on the other side came to her knees. She walked toward the trees. It was harder than she had imagined. Each step took effort, lifting her foot clear of the snow and finding ground beneath. The wind came in gusts that pushed at her sideways and threw snow crystals into the gap between her scarf and her chin. Her face went from cold to numb in the first few minutes, which was actually a relief because at least it stopped hurting. Captain's head bobbed at her chin as she walked. She talked to him when the wind allowed it. "We are going to find someone," she told him. She had a vague idea about this. She had seen a program once on the tablet about shelters and community centers and warm places where people went when they had nowhere else. She did not know exactly where such a place was, but she knew it was somewhere that was not here, and she believed that if she walked long enough, she would arrive at a somewhere. She reached the tree line and went into the forest. The trees changed everything. They broke the wind and swallowed the light and turned the world into a maze of dark shapes and shifting shadows. The snow here was shallower under the canopy, but the ground was uneven, threaded with roots and hidden rocks that caught at her boots. Ellie walked for what felt like a very long time. At some point, she realized she did not know which direction she had come from. The trees all looked the same. The wind came from different angles in here, bending down from the branches, and she could not use it to orient herself the way she might have in the open field. She turned around once, and then again, and chose a direction that seemed to slope slightly downward because she remembered from somewhere that water ran downhill and water meant people. Her legs had stopped feeling heavy. They had gone past heavy to something else, something distant and mechanical, like they belonged to someone else, and she was only borrowing them. She fell. She did not see what caught her boot, a root or a ridge of frozen ground beneath the snow, but one moment she was moving, and the next she was face first in the white, the cold flooding her cheeks and her mouth and her nose all at once. She pushed herself up, got to her knees, and then could not quite get further than that. Captain had tumbled out from inside her coat and landed a few feet away. She reached for him and got her fingers around his arm and pulled him back. She held him against her chest and sat in the snow and felt the cold move inward, past her coat, past her layers into the place where warmth was supposed to live. She was very tired. She did not mean to lie down. It simply happened the way sleep sometimes happened. When she was reading, she was sitting up and then she was not, and the snow was against her cheek and it did not feel as cold anymore, which she understood somewhere far back in her mind was not a good sign, but the understanding was slow and distant and did not seem urgent enough to act on. The sound came from far away at first, a low mechanical growl growing louder. She knew that sound. She had heard it on summer evenings sometimes from the window seat motorcycles moving along the state highway 3 miles west of the house, their engines rolling through the warm air like distant thunder. This one was close. She heard it cut through the trees, the headlights sweeping through the dark in a long arc, and then the engine dropped to idle, and she heard boots on frozen ground and snow quick and heavy coming toward her. A large shape crouched beside her. "Hey!" The voice was low and rough like gravel run through a machine. "Hey, little one, open your eyes." She opened them. The man kneeling over her was big. That was the first thing she registered. Big the way buildings were big, filling the available space. He had a dark beard and deep-set eyes, and he was wearing a leather jacket over a flannel shirt, and the cold did not seem to bother him the way it bothered her. There were tattoos on the backs of his hands, dark ink blurred at the edges. She looked at him for a moment. "Are you the police?" she asked. Her voice came out strange, flat, and slow. "No," he was already shrugging out of his jacket. "I am just somebody who found you." He wrapped the jacket around her, and the warmth inside it, his warmth hit her like something physical. "Can you feel your fingers?" She tried, a little. "Okay." He slid one arm under her knees and the other behind her back. "I am going to pick you up now. Do not be scared." "I am not scared," Ellie said. This was mostly true. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, and she felt the solid warmth of his chest through the flannel shirt, and she tucked her face against it, because the wind was still coming and his body blocked it completely. "There is a cabin about 2 miles east," he said, already moving. "You are going to be fine." Ellie held Captain tighter and decided to believe him. His name, he told her while the soup was heating, was Jack. Just Jack. She could call him Mr. Jack if she wanted. She told him she was Ellie. He said that was a good name. She asked him why he was in the forest on a motorcycle in the middle of the night, and he said he lived there, that the forest was his backyard, more or less. She said that was unusual. He agreed. The cabin was 1 room wide and low-ceilinged, with a stone fireplace on the north wall and a wood stove in the kitchen corner and a single bare bulb hanging from the center beam. The furniture was old and mismatched: an armchair with the stuffing coming through one armrest, a pine table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed behind a curtain at the far end. On the wall near the door, there were 3 photographs in plain frames. She looked at them while he stirred the soup. A woman laughing in front of a lake. The same woman standing next to a much younger version of Jack. He had been thinner than sharper edged. And a small wooden cross painted white mounted between the 2 photographs like a period at the end of something. "Who is she?" Ellie asked. Jack did not turn from the stove right away. "Her name was Maria." She died a few years back. Ellie considered this. "I am sorry." "Me too." He brought the soup over and set it on the table and helped her wrap her hands around the bowl. Her fingers were still clumsy from the cold. The soup was chicken broth with egg noodles and soft carrots, simple and exactly right, and she ate all of it while he sat across from her with a mug of coffee and watched her with the careful attention of someone making sure a fragile thing stayed together. "Do you have kids?" she asked between spoonfuls. The pause before he answered was very small. "No." "Were you going to—" Another pause. "Once." She looked at the cross on the wall and then back at her soup. She understood in the way she understood most things, not fully, but enough. She did not ask anything else about it. When the soup was gone, she was warm enough to feel tired. He moved the armchair closer to the fire and wrapped her in a wool blanket that smelled of cedar and old wood, and she fell asleep sitting upright, her head tilting sideways until it rested against the chair's high back. Jack sat across from her and watched the fire and did not sleep. In the morning, she told him about the paper in the drawer. She had not planned to. She had been eating the scrambled eggs he made. He cooked them with a little cream and a pinch of smoked paprika, and they were the best eggs she had ever eaten. Though she suspected this had as much to do with hunger and cold as technique, and he had asked simply and without pressure what made her leave. She told him about finding the paper, about the word declines, about how her father had written his full name at the bottom, all 3 names, as if she were a business matter being officially resolved. Jack was quiet for a long time after she finished. He turned his coffee mug between his large hands, looking at the table. "And your mom?" he asked. "She works," Ellie said. "She works all the time. She loves me, I think. But she is always in her office." She looked at her eggs. "Sometimes I stand outside the door and I can hear her talking to other people, laughing at things they say, and I just wanted to be in there. I wanted to be the one she was talking to." She paused. "Is that a bad thing to want?" "No," Jack said. "That is a very normal thing to want. She always says she is doing it for me, for my future." Maybe she believes that. Maybe. Ellie used her fork to push a piece of egg in a small circle. "But I am here now, not in the future." Jack looked at her for a moment, and something shifted in his expression. Something that moved through his eyes and settled. He set down his coffee mug. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I want you to be honest with me about how it makes you feel, okay? Because I am going to be honest with you." Ellie put down her fork. She looked at him straight. "People are going to be looking for you," he said. "Your mom, probably the police. This is not something we can just stay here and ignore. I should have called someone last night, but my phone was dead, and by morning you were awake," and he stopped. Started again. "The honest truth is I did not call because I could not figure out how to explain this without it looking bad for me. And I am not going to lie to you about that. Ellie regarded him with those dark eyes that seemed to take his measure carefully and thoroughly. Why would it look bad? He reached up and pulled back the left cuff of his flannel shirt, enough to show the tattoos there, the ones that were not just decoration, the ones with specific shapes and meanings. I was not a good man for a lot of years, he said. I did things I am not proud of. I was part of a group of motorcycle club that did bad things. I have been out for 3 years, trying to be different. But my past is the kind of past that looks a certain way on paper. Ellie studied the tattoos. Then she looked back at his face. But you are not bad now, she said. It was not quite a question. I am trying not to be. She picked up her fork again. Then we will explain that she said as if it were simple, as if the complicated machinery of the adult world were amenable to simple explanations from 6-year-olds. We will just tell them the truth. Jack watched her eat for a moment. Yeah, he said. Okay. He tried to call from his landline that afternoon. The phone line had gone down in the night. The storm had taken it with it, a falling pine somewhere along the East Ridge knocking out the connection. He had no cell signal this deep in the trees. The nearest town was 12 miles by road, longer by trail. He told Ellie he was going to need to drive her out in the morning when the roads had been cleared enough for his truck. She nodded and asked if she could help him stack firewood in the meantime because sitting still made her feel like she was waiting for something bad, and stacking wood was a way of doing something real with her hands. He showed her how. She was surprisingly good at it, patient and methodical, fitting the split logs together the way she would fit puzzle pieces. They worked in companionable silence for an hour, and when the stack was done, she asked him to teach her to identify the trees. He named them as they walked along the cabin's perimeter: lodgepole pine Douglas, fir Engelmann spruce, and she repeated each name back with the seriousness of someone memorizing something that would matter later. That night, he read to her from a field guide to Montana birds, which was the only book in the cabin, written in plain enough language that she could follow it. She fell asleep with her cheek on the open page, her fingers loosely holding Captain's arm. Jack sat by the fire. He looked at Maria's photograph on the wall. He had not spoken to Maria in 4 years because that was not possible. But he spoke to her sometimes in his head in the late night hours when the cabin was quiet enough to hear his own thoughts clearly. I do not know what I am doing, he said to her. She would have known what to say. She always had. He looked at the sleeping child with the bird guide under her cheek and the one-eyed bear in her arms. She came out of the snow, he said, right out of the dark in the snow. What was I supposed to do? He thought he could hear Maria's answer, even if he could not really. It sounded like what you did. The morning was clear and very cold, the sky overhead a deep wash blue. Jack was at the wood stove starting the fire for breakfast when the first sound reached him from outside. He went still. Engines. More than one. The particular low throttle of machines being ridden slowly and deliberately, not the highway sound of speed, but the rolling approach of people who knew where they were going and were not in a hurry about arriving. He went to the window. Through the pines, he could see the chrome catching the morning light. 3 bikes, then a 4th, moving in file along the old logging road that ran below his property. He recognized the lead machine before he could see the rider clearly. A custom chopper, low and wide, the tank painted with a faded eagle design that had once meant something to him. The extended front forks, the deliberate stance of something built to be seen. Rex Calloway. Jack's stomach dropped through the floor. He turned to the table. Ellie was sitting up in the armchair, rubbing her eyes still wrapped in the blanket. She looked at him and registered his expression immediately. What is wrong? Nothing, he said, and then some people I used to know are outside. People I do not want to see. I need you to go to the back of the cabin and stay quiet. Can you do that for me? She was already moving to tucking Captain under her arm. Like hide and seek, exactly like that. Behind the wardrobe, there is a space I use for storage. Get in there and pull the door. Do not come out until I come get you, no matter what you hear. Okay, she said, and she went, and she did not ask any more questions, and Jack thought that trust, like that clean and immediate and unearned, was either the bravest or the most heartbreaking thing he had ever seen. He went to the door. Rex had not changed much. He was wider through the chest, maybe, and there were more lines around his eyes. But the eyes themselves were the same pale gray, and patient in the way of a man who understood leverage and timing. He had 3 men behind him, none of whom Jack recognized. The club cycled through members. He had learned not to attach to names. Rex stood on the porch with his hands in his jacket pockets and smiled. "Tommy," he said. Nobody but Rex had ever called him that. "Hell of a place you picked." "I like the quiet," Jack said. He kept his body in the doorframe. "What do you want, Rex?" "That is direct. I appreciate that." Rex looked past him into the interior of the cabin, his pale eyes moving across the visible surfaces. His gaze snagged on something in the second bowl on the drying rack, the child-sized boots near the door that Ellie had taken off the night before. He looked at Jack. Jack kept his expression flat. Rex smiled again differently. "Club needs you back," he said. "Things are moving in this part of the state. We are establishing something significant, and we need men who know the terrain, know the roads, know who is who in these counties. You are the best we ever had at that. I am done with that life." "Everybody says that." Rex's smile did not waver. "Very few people mean it." "I mean it." Rex nodded slowly as if considering this. "Well, I am not going to argue with you today. I just came to remind you that the door is open." He looked again at the boots. "And to tell you that we know about your house guest." The cold that moved through Jack had nothing to do with the temperature. "I do not have a house guest. Hartwell girl," Rex said conversationally. "Been all over the news. Her mother has a private investigator and half the county sheriff's department looking. Big reward." He tilted his head. "Funny thing, those boots." Jack said nothing. "I am not interested in the reward," Rex said. "That is not what I am here for. What I am here for is a conversation about the future. Your future. And what it looks like if you are cooperative versus what it looks like if you are not." He paused. "You understand how that looks." "I understand how it looks." "Then you understand you do not have a position to negotiate from. You have a record. You have ink on your skin. They will photograph for the jury. You have the worst possible optics for a man claiming to be a good Samaritan." Rex tilted his head. "Come back to the club. We relocate. You never have to see this kid again. The family gets her back, and this all goes away quietly." Jack stood very still. Rex took a step back. "I will give you a day to think about it, Tommy. I am a reasonable man." He turned and went down the porch steps, and the others followed, and the 4 bikes started up and rolled back along the logging road and out of sight. Jack stood in the doorway until he could not hear them anymore. Then he went back inside to find Ellie already creeping out from behind the wardrobe, her expression watchful and composed. "Those were the bad men," she said. It was not a question. "Yes. Are they going to come back?" "Probably." She thought about this. "Then we should go somewhere else." Jack looked at her, this 6-year-old with the one-eyed bear and the pragmatism of a field commander. He thought about the logging road and the reward, and the 12 miles of snowbound road to town, and everything that waited at the end of it for a man with his particular history found alone in a cabin with a missing child. "Yeah," he said. "We should." They packed in 20 minutes. Jack moved efficiently through the cabin, rolling clothes into a pack, filling a second bag with food, dried goods, canned soup, a block of cheese, the granola bars from the upper cabinet, a thermos for water. He took the hand radio from the shelf, though the battery was low. He took the matches, the small first aid kit, the map. Ellie packed her own bag, which was the backpack from her escaped, now refilled captain, the field guide to Montana birds that she had adopted without asking permission. A drawing she had made that morning before the engines came, a rough sketch of the cabin, with a pine tree beside it and a sun above rendered in pencil with careful attention to the bark texture. She put on her boots herself, zipped her own coat to the chin. "Ready," she said. Jack shouldered his pack. He looked at Maria's photographs on the wall. He would not be coming back to this cabin, not for a while, not until this resolved itself one way or another. "Take care of her," he said to the photograph. Then he felt foolish for saying it, and then he felt that the foolishness did not matter, and he followed Ellie out the door. They moved east through the trees, away from the logging road, away from the way Rex had come. The snow was firm and crunchy in the cold morning air, and their footprints showed clearly behind them, which Jack knew was a problem he could not do much about. Ellie walked beside him without complaint. She would find a way to keep up with his longer stride by taking quick double steps every few paces, and after a while he slowed down enough that she did not have to. "Mr. Jack," she said after they had been walking for a while. "Yeah, that man, the one on the front porch." She was looking ahead at the trees as she walked. "He is not going to stop, is he?" Jack was quiet for a moment. "No," he said, "probably not." She nodded very seriously as if he had confirmed something she had already suspected. "Then we have to figure out something better than running," she said. Jack looked down at her, small and determined in her green coat, her breath making small clouds in the cold air. He thought she is right. He thought, "I have no idea how to do that." He thought, "I am going to have to learn." The trees closed around them as they walked, and the cabin disappeared behind them. And somewhere to the west, Rex Calloway's bike rolled along a county road, moving with the patience of a man who understood that running only worked for so long. The second cabin was smaller than the first and had not been used in 2 winters. Jack found the key under the third stone from the left on the front step, where he had put it years ago on a night when he needed a place no one knew about, and had driven through a February ice storm to get there. That night felt like it belonged to a different man. In some ways it did. He got the wood stove lit while Ellie walked the perimeter of the single main room inspecting things. She opened and closed the 2 kitchen cabinet doors. She tested the second door, the one that led to a small cold storage room at the back, and reported that it smelled like pine and old motor oil, which she considered acceptable. She found a tin of colored pencils on the window shelf, dried out and old, and tried each one against the wall beside the stove until she found 3 that still worked. Red, green, a brown that was technically closer to rust. "I can work with these," she said. Jack had not smiled much in 3 years of living alone. He was surprised at how easily it came now. He heated canned soup for lunch, and they sat at the narrow table and ate in the easy quiet that had developed between them over the past few days. Not the silence of people with nothing to say, but the silence of people who had already said enough important things and could let the rest wait. "Tell me about your wife," Ellie said. Jack looked up. "If you want to," she added, "you do not have to." He put his spoon down. He looked at the table for a moment, choosing words the way he chose tools, deliberately the right one for the job. "Her name was Maria," he said. "She was from the same town I grew up in southern Idaho. We met when I was 22. She was the kind of person who made rooms feel different when she walked into them. Not because she was loud or dramatic, just because she was present. She was completely there wherever she was. Most people are thinking about somewhere else most of the time. Maria was not like that." Ellie listened with her chin in her hands. "She knew about the club," Jack said. "She did not like it. She told me very clearly that it was going to cost me something I could not get back. And she was right. She usually was." He picked up his spoon again, turned it between his fingers. "We found out she was pregnant about a year before she died. That was the happiest I ever felt in my life. I thought, now I have a reason. Now I have something real to build toward." He set the spoon down again. "The baby came early. He did not make it. 3 days. He was quiet. And then Maria was sick, and I was trying to hold everything together with the wrong hands, the hands I had built for different work, and I did not hold it together." Ellie was very still. "What happened to her?" "Heart failure. 18 months after the baby. The doctor said it was not related, that it was a condition she had without knowing. But I have always thought," he shook his head, "I think grief can do things to a person that medicine does not have names for yet." The stove ticked quietly. Outside, a branch scraped the roof. "I think so too," Ellie said. "I think that is why Mommy works all the time. Because if she stops, she has to feel things." Jack looked at her. "She used to laugh more," Ellie said. "Before Daddy left. Before everything. She used to make Sunday morning pancakes and sing off key to the radio." She looked at the rust-brown pencil in her hand. "I do not know when she stopped. It happened slowly." "Things usually do," Jack said. She nodded. She picked up the pencil and started drawing on the corner of her paper, something small, a bird rough but recognizable, one wing extended. "I am going to find a way to fix this," Jack said. "The situation we are in. I want you to know that." Ellie did not look up from her drawing. "I know," she said. I am not worried. He thought about asking her why. Then he decided it did not matter. Her not being worried was enough. The 3 days in the second cabin were the most ordinary days Jack had spent in years. They established rhythms without discussing them. He rose early and had the stove going before Ellie woke. She drew elaborate maps of the cabin and the surrounding forest, annotating them with the names of trees he had taught her, lodgepole pine Douglas fir, and the locations of animal tracks she had seen when they walked the perimeter together in the late morning. He split wood in the afternoon while she sat on the porch step reading the bird guide, occasionally reporting facts she found remarkable. Did you know the Clark's nutcracker can remember where it hides up to 30,000 seeds? He said he did not know that. She said she found it comforting, the idea of something keeping track. He began to understand what her mother had meant, what she had failed to see about this child. Ellie did not ask for entertainment. She did not require distraction. She sat inside a moment completely the way Maria had and found what was worth finding in it. Given the right conditions, warmth, quiet, a person who listened, she expanded into them naturally and without effort. He began to understand how a house full of expensive objects and a mother always behind a closed door would feel to a child like this, like a kind of starvation. On the second evening, she asked him to teach her to play cards. He knew 3 games, gin rummy, cribbage, and a complicated form of solitaire he had learned in a county jail in his 20s. He taught her gin rummy. She beat him twice by the third hand. He accused her of counting cards. She said she was not, but she did know what cards had already been played because you had to keep track or the whole thing was chaos. He said that was the same thing as counting cards. She said it was just paying attention, which was different. He let her win the argument. On the third morning, while Ellie was at the porch step with her bird guide, and he was splitting wood at the side of the cabin, a sound reached him through the trees that made him lower the axe slowly and stand very still. One engine, coming from the North Trail. He had been watching the North Trail since they arrived, checking it at dawn and dusk, because it was the approach he would have used if he were Rex, and he had 2 days to think about where a man like Jack would go when pushed off the main property. He had counted on having more time. He had been wrong. He called to Ellie quietly. She came around the corner of the cabin without being told twice, reading his expression, and went straight to the storage room door and pulled it behind her. Jack set down the axe and stood on the porch. Rex came alone this time, which was either a concession or a strategy. He parked at the tree line and walked up unhurried, his hands visible, and stopped at the base of the porch steps. The night was very clear and very cold, the stars beginning to sharpen in the early dusk. He looked at Jack for a long moment without speaking. "I have been thinking," Rex said finally. Jack waited. "About Jimmy Featherstone." The name moved through Jack like something physical. He had not said it aloud in 2 years. "His mother wore a black dress," Jack said, "and a hat with a little veil." Rex looked at the porch boards. "Yeah. I see her every time I close my eyes, Rex. Every single time. I see her at the graveside and I hear the sound she made when they folded the flag. And I think about what we were fighting over that night. Territory. 2 blocks of territory that meant nothing 6 months later." He looked at Rex. "I cannot do it anymore. I am not asking you to understand that. I am just telling you it is true." Rex was quiet for a long time. "The club needs a man on the ground here," he said. "That was the reason I came. That is still the reason." "I know." But Rex stopped. He reached into his jacket pocket, and Jack's body went rigid, and Rex pulled out a phone and set it on the porch railing with the deliberate slowness of someone demonstrating that the gesture meant something specific. He stepped back. "Call it in yourself," Rex said. "Turn yourself in before they find you. You do it on your own terms. You have got a better chance of this not ending the way it could." He looked at the phone. "I am not going to be the one who makes the call." That is, Jimmy would have hated all of this. He backed down the porch steps. "You did not hear that from me." He mounted his bike, the engine started. He rode back down the trail and out of sight. From behind the storage room door, quiet as a held breath, came the sound of Ellie moving. She opened the door and stepped out and walked to Jack's side and stood there looking at the phone on the railing. "I heard," she said. Jack looked at her. "I know you were supposed to stay inside. I know, she said, but I wanted to hear what he would say. She looked up at him. He is not as bad as he seems. Jack thought about Jimmy Featherstone's mother and her little veil. Nobody usually is, he said. He picked up the phone. He looked at it. He looked at Ellie. She looked back at him with those steady dark eyes. We said we would do it the right way, she said. That was what you told me. Running only lasts so long. Yeah, he said. He dialed. The sheriff's deputy arrived 40 minutes later, followed by a social services officer named Beth Okafor, who had kind eyes and a professional patience that Ellie responded to immediately. Jack met them at the door with his hands visible, no quick movement, speaking in the slow, clear way of someone who had practiced this moment in his head during the 40 minutes since he had made the call. He told them what happened, all of it, finding her in the snow, the dead phone line, the 2 days at the first cabin, the move Rex's visits. He left nothing out. He made no excuses for why he had not gotten word out sooner, except to say that the phone line went down and the road was impassable, and then things moved too fast to catch up with. He said he understood how it looked. He said he was not going to ask them to take his word for it, that he expected their skepticism and invited their investigation. He said the only thing he cared about was making sure Ellie was safe, and that the best way he could demonstrate that was by being the one who called. Ellie sat at the kitchen table during all of this. Beth Okafor sat with her, and they talked quietly about the bird guide, and about Captain's missing eye, and about whether lodgepole pine or Douglas fir was the better Christmas tree. Ellie said she preferred spruce but could see the argument for fir. When the deputy put handcuffs on Jack, Ellie stood up. He did not do anything wrong, she said. I know it might feel that way, the deputy said. He was not unkind, but we have to follow procedure. Ellie looked at Jack. It is okay, Jack said. This is how it works. We said we would do it the right way. She pressed her lips together. Her eyes were very bright. I will find you, she said. I will tell them everything. He held her eyes. I know you will. Beth Okafor put a hand on Ellie's shoulder. You are going to stay with us for a little while, okay? Just while some grown-ups work some things out. Ellie allowed herself to be guided toward the door. She carried Captain and the bird guide. At the threshold, she stopped and looked back at Jack, standing in the kitchen in handcuffs with his big shoulders squared and his expression steady. Mr. Jack, she said. Yeah, do not be scared. He nodded once. You either, he said. She walked out. The County Family Services facility was a low beige building on the western edge of Helena, the kind of building that tried to be inoffensive and succeeded mainly at being anonymous. Ellie's room had a bed with a blue comforter and a window that looked out at a parking lot where pigeons gathered in the mornings. She made a list of the bird guide's facts she could remember by heart and posted it on the wall above the bed. She did not eat dinner the first evening. She sat on the bed and held Captain and looked at the door and waited. Beth Okafor sat with her for an hour, and 2 other staff members checked on her at intervals, and a child psychologist named Dr. Voss came in the early evening and spoke to her gently about feelings, and Ellie answered everything patiently and correctly, and when they finally left her alone, she lay in the dark with her eyes open and thought about the porch step and the stars and the phone Rex had left on the railing. She thought about what Jack had said. This is how it works. We said we would do it the right way. She understood this. She understood that the right way was often the hard way, and that the hard way was often the longer way. She understood this in the abstract. In the concrete, it felt like a stone sitting on her chest. She heard the door to the facility open in the hallway, heard voices, staff voices, and then another voice, one she recognized. Her mother. Diana Hartwell moved with the specific energy of a person who had cleared every obstacle between herself and where she needed to be. Ellie heard the conversation in the hallway, terse, professional, the sounds of authority being exercised and then deferred to, and then the door opened. Her mother stood in the doorway in a wool coat, her dark hair slightly disordered, her face stripped of the particular composure she wore in public like a second skin. She looked older than Ellie remembered. She looked like she had been running. Ellie, she said. Ellie sat up on the bed. She held Captain. Hi, Mommy. Diana crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed and reached for her daughter. and Ellie let herself be held. And for a moment, it was exactly what it had always been, the smell of her mother's coat. The warmth, the specific way Diana held the back of her head with one hand as if protecting it. Then Diana pulled back and looked at her. Are you hurt? No. Are you okay? Yes. Diana's hands were on her shoulders, examining her, checking. You walked into those woods alone, in a blizzard. Do you understand how? Her voice broke slightly. She pressed her lips together, started again. Do you understand how frightened I was? Ellie looked at her mother. Did you notice, she asked, that first night? How long before you noticed I was gone? The silence was its own answer. Diana's face did something complicated. The composure reached for her and then fell back. I went to say goodnight, she said, and you were not there, and your boots were missing. Her voice was very careful. It was almost midnight. Ellie counted backward from when she had left. She had left at approximately 8:30. 3.5 hours. She had been in the snow for over 2 hours before Jack found her. She did not say any of this aloud. She looked at her mother's face and understood that her mother was calculating the same numbers, arriving at the same total. He found me, Ellie said. Mr. Jack. He brought me inside and fed me and kept me warm. She looked down at Captain. He is a good person. He made mistakes before, but he is not the same as his mistakes. She looked up. He needs someone to stand up for him. Diana looked at her daughter for a long moment. I know, she said softly. Will you, Ellie asked. Her mother was quiet for a long time. I do not know yet, she said, but I am going to try to be someone who does the right thing. She reached up and smoothed Ellie's hair. Starting with being here. When you need me, I am going to try to get better at that. Ellie studied her mother's face. She knew about trying. She knew it was not the same as doing, but she also knew it was where doing started. Okay, she said. She let her mother hold her again, and this time she held back. Outside the facility in the parking lot, where the last of the evening light turned the snow a dull orange, Diana sat in her car for a long time without starting the engine. She had her phone in her hand. She had 17 unread messages from her attorney, and 2 from her assistant, and 1 from a number she did not recognize that turned out to be a reporter. She put the phone face down on the passenger seat. She thought about the way Ellie had looked at her when she asked the question. Did you notice? Not accusatory, not even angry. Just a question asked straight, the way Ellie asked everything, with the assumption that the answer would be honest, because she herself would have given an honest answer in return. 3.5 hours. Diana had been on a call about a commercial property assessment in Great Falls. She had been using the good headset, the one that canceled out background noise. She had made a note to follow up about zoning, and then another note about the contractor's timeline, and at 11:47, she had walked to Emily's room to say goodnight on her way to bed and found the room empty and the boots gone from the closet. She had not heard a door. She had not heard footsteps on the back stairs. She had not heard anything because she had been wearing the headset, and the headset canceled out background noise. She pressed her forehead against the steering wheel. She thought about the things Ellie had said over the past year, the things Diane had heard without listening. You are always in your office. He listens when I talk. He sees me. She thought about a Sunday morning 4 years ago when she had made pancakes and danced badly to the radio while Ellie sat on the counter and laughed. She had not done that in 4 years. She had not done it because there was always something more urgent, and urgency had become the texture of her life, the medium she moved through, until she had forgotten that urgency was a choice she was making and not a condition of existence. She sat up. She started the engine. She drove to the county public defender's office and asked to leave a message for the attorney assigned to Jack Malone's case. 2 weeks later, in a conference room at the county public defender's office, Jack met Frank Delaney for the first time. Frank was 65 years old and had the build of a man who had once been physically powerful and now carried it more quietly, weight redistributed by decades of desk work and courtroom standing. He had a gray mustache and wire-rimmed glasses in a briefcase that had been resold twice rather than replaced. He had spent 30 years as a public defender in Missoula County and had seen things that had long since stopped surprising him, but he still found it worth showing up. He had a yellow legal pad and a pen, and he sat down across the table from Jack and said, "Tell me everything. Do not edit. Do not explain. Just tell me what happened." Jack told him everything. When he finished, Frank sat for a moment with his pen still. "The girl," he said, "she is willing to testify. She is 6. I know how old she is. Is she willing?" Jack thought of Ellie on the porch, standing beside him, looking at Rex Calloway's empty parking space, her chin lifted. "Yes," he said, "she is willing." Frank nodded. He wrote something on the pad. "The mother is the variable I cannot read yet. Her lawyer is good. But the mother?" He tapped his pen. "I have watched a lot of trials. The most important testimony usually comes from the person who changes their mind in the middle of it." He looked up. "We need her to get there herself. We cannot push her." "I am not interested in pushing anyone," Jack said. "I am just interested in the truth." Frank studied him over the wire-rimmed glasses. In 30 years, Frank said, "I have heard every version of that sentence from every kind of person. Most of them meant it part way." He paused. "I believe you mean it completely." "I do." "Then here is what we are going to do." Also in the gallery, in the third row on Jack's side of the room, sat Roy Briggs. Roy was 70 years old and had lived 12 miles from Jack's first cabin for the past 11 years since his wife passed, and he had stopped seeing the point of staying in Billings. He was a retired Forest Service ranger with a face that had been weathered to the texture of old saddle leather and a manner of speaking that required you to pay close attention, or you would miss something important in the gaps between his words. He had brought his own reading glasses and a thermos of coffee he was not supposed to have in the courtroom, and had been asked twice to put it away. He gave Jack a small nod when their eyes met across the courtroom. Jack gave one back. The courtroom was on the third floor of the Lewis and Clark County Courthouse, a high-ceilinged room with tall windows and the smell of old wood and institutional carpet. The benches had been worn smooth by decades of people waiting for verdicts on the most important days of their lives. Jack sat at the defendant's table in the seat Frank had borrowed from a colleague. It fit through the chest, but was short in the sleeves and the collar was tight, and he had not owned a tie in 15 years. Frank had shown him how to tie it twice in the parking lot that morning. Across the aisle, Dana Hartwell sat with her legal team. She wore a charcoal suit, and her dark hair was pulled back precisely. She had not looked at Jack since the proceedings began. In the gallery, a handful of reporters occupied the back 2 rows. This was news. Quietly ex-biker found with senator's daughter in remote cabin was the kind of story that wrote its own headlines. But the family court designation kept cameras out, which Frank said was the best thing they had going for them. Diana's attorney went first. He was a compact man named Whitmore, who spoke with the precision of someone accustomed to persuading sophisticated audiences. He laid out the facts in the order most favorable to his client: a child missing from a secure residence found days later in the company of an individual with a documented criminal record, including assault and a 7-year association with a federally monitored criminal organization. He was careful and measured and did not editorialize, which made it more effective. He called Diana to the stand. She testified in the same careful register she had used in the hallway, with the reporters precise and controlled. She described her home, her resources, the stability she could provide. She described her work schedule and acknowledged when Whitmore prompted her that she had not always been as present as she should have been. She said this calmly and with the affect of someone who had reached an understanding of a mistake without yet feeling it. The judge, Patricia Owens, silver-haired and unhurried, listened with the quality of attention that made the room feel observed in every corner. Frank cross-examined Diana briefly. He asked her only 2 questions. The first, "Mrs. Hartwell, are you aware that your daughter left your home at approximately 8:30 in the evening?" "I was told that, yes." "And you discovered she was missing at approximately midnight?" "Yes." "Thank you." No further questions. The second question came later, after a recess when Diana had returned to her seat and the room had settled. Frank stood and looked at Diana and said, "Mrs. Hartwell, who suggested the ballet program at Brighton Academy." Diana paused. "I did." "Did Ellie ask for it?" "Not specifically, but she had shown interest in dance previously." "How recently had she shown that interest?" A longer pause. "A few years ago." "Approximately how many years?" "3," Diana said very quietly. So when she disappeared, Frank said the most concrete plan you had for reconnecting with your daughter was enrollment in an activity she had stopped requesting 3 years prior. Whitmore objected. Frank withdrew, but the questions sat in the room. Frank called Roy Briggs. Roy made his way to the stand with the deliberate, unhurried movement of someone who had decided how fast he was going to move and was not going to renegotiate it. He settled into the chair and looked out at the room with the impartial calm of a man who had seen elk migrations and forest fires and found courtrooms roughly equivalent in their fundamental nature. Frank asked him how long he had known Jack Malone. 3 years, Roy said, give or take. How would you characterize your relationship? Roy thought about this. Neighbor, something like a friend. It takes time way out where we are. Can you tell the court what you have observed about Mr. Malone's conduct in those 3 years? Roy folded his large hands on the railing in front of him. First time I met Jack, I was having trouble with my generator, he said. It was January. Temperatures had been ugly for 2 weeks straight. I am not as young as I was, and that generator is the difference between uncomfortable and genuinely dangerous. I could not get the part I needed until the road cleared, and I mentioned it to Jack when I ran into him on the trail. 2 days later, he comes over with the part he had ordered online and shipped to a box in town, and he fixes the whole thing and will not take a cent for any of it. Roy paused. That is the first thing. And since then I have watched him rebuild that cabin top to bottom, done every inch of it himself, keeps it clean, keeps to himself mostly, which out there is considered polite, does not drink, does not give me any reason to be worried. Roy looked at Jack for a moment. I have known men with bad pasts. I had one of my own for a stretch back in my 30s. The thing about a man who has genuinely changed is that he is quieter than he used to be, and he is more careful with things. He takes more time. Jack is like that. Did you have any contact with Jack Malone during the period following his arrest? I did. He called me from the county facility. He was concerned, not about the case, about whether the girl was okay. That was the first thing he asked, whether she was somewhere warm and whether they had let her keep the bear. Roy looked at the judge. That is the sort of thing that tells you who somebody is. Frank called Ellie. She walked to the stand with Beth Okafor beside her and took her seat in the large wooden chair, her feet several inches above the floor. She wore a dress that Diana had sent over dark blue with small white stars, and her hair was brushed and neat. She held Captain loosely in her lap. Judge Owens had allowed it. Frank approached slowly and crouched to her level. Ellie, he said, do you know why we are all here today? Yes, she said, to figure out who I live with. That is right. And the judge has told you that she needs you to be completely honest no matter what. Can you do that? Yes, I always try to. Can you tell me about the night you left your house? Ellie told it clearly and without decoration the way she did most things. She described the paper in the drawer, the word declines, the boots in the snow and Captain tucked inside her coat. The moment she could not feel her feet anymore, the motorcycle light through the trees. And what happened when Mr. Malone found you? He wrapped me in his jacket, Ellie said. It smelled like motor oil. I thought that was interesting. He carried me to his cabin and made me soup and covered me up by the fire. She looked at her hands. He checked on me twice in the night. I know because I woke up both times and he was just sitting there watching to make sure I was okay. Did you feel frightened of him? No. Why not? She thought about this seriously. Because he was gentle. People who mean to hurt you do not usually hold you like something breakable. She considered. And he was honest. He told me about his past right away. He did not pretend to be something he was not. She paused. Most adults pretend a lot. Frank nodded. Can you tell me what you told him about why you left home? Ellie glanced once toward her mother's side of the room. I told him that Mommy loved me, but she was always in her office, and that Daddy had signed a paper saying he did not want to see me anymore. She looked at her hands again. I told him I wanted to find someone who actually wanted to be in the same room as me. The courtroom was very quiet. And did you feel that Mr. Malone wanted that? Frank asked. Yes, Ellie said. He was not performing it the way some grown-ups do. He just paid attention. He taught me the names of trees and how to stack wood, and he read to me from the bird book, even though I could read it myself because reading together is different from reading alone. She looked up. He made me feel like I mattered to the specific hour I was in, not some future hour, the one I was actually in. Frank said, "Thank you, Ellie, that is all." Whitmore's cross-examination was brief and careful. He established that Ellie had not been in danger in Jack's care, that she had been warm and fed and not frightened. He did not push her. He was not foolish enough to push her. Then he asked Ellie, "Do you love your mother?" "Yes," Ellie said. "Of course." "Do you want to live with her?" Ellie was quiet for a moment. "I want her to be okay," she said. "I want her to get some help with the working all the time problem. I think she could be. I think she used to be different. I would like to know that person again." She looked toward Diana. "But right now, the person I feel safest with is Mr. Jack, because he showed me, not just said it." She turned back to the judge. "I know the difference." Judge Owen set down her pen. Whitmore called a psychologist who had reviewed Jack's file and spoke clinically about the profile of individuals with long-term gang involvement, about recidivism rates, about the statistical likelihood of behavioral pattern continuation. Frank did not challenge the statistics. He asked the psychologist a single question. "In your professional assessment, is there any behavioral or psychological indicator in Mr. Malone's documented history over the past 3 years, post-club, that suggests risk to a child in his care?" The psychologist reviewed her notes. "No," she said. "The record shows no such indicator." Frank sat down. Diana Hartwell asked to make a statement. This was irregular, and Whitmore moved to prevent it, but Diana overrode him in a quiet voice that allowed no room for argument. Judge Owens permitted it. Diana rose and buttoned her jacket and walked to a position between the two tables facing the judge. And she stood the way she always stood, straight and prepared. But there was something underneath it now that had not been there before, something that looked like the particular courage of a person choosing to be honest at personal cost. "Your Honor," she said, "I would like to withdraw my petition for full custody." Whitmore made a sound. Diana continued, "I am asking the court to consider what is genuinely best for my daughter, independent of my own preferences. And I believe that the evidence in this proceeding has made clear that what is best for Ellie is stability, attentiveness, and genuine emotional presence. I have not provided those things consistently. I intend to change that, but change takes time and Ellie cannot wait." She looked finally at Jack. "Mr. Malone has provided my daughter with something I was not providing. I am not comfortable saying that aloud, but I believe it is true, and the truth is what Ellie asked for, and she deserves at least that from me." She returned to her seat. Whitmore stared at his legal pad. Frank looked at the table and said nothing. Judge Patricia Owens took a 30-minute recess. When she returned, she arranged her papers and removed her glasses and polished them with a small cloth, which Frank had told Jack she did when she was organizing her thoughts rather than her ruling. She put the glasses back on. "This case presents an unusual convergence of circumstances," she said. "A child who acted in her own way with remarkable clarity about what she needed. A man whose past would ordinarily present significant cause for concern, and whose present conduct presents equally significantly cause for confidence. And a mother who has demonstrated in this proceeding a capacity for honesty that is rarer than it should be." She looked at Jack. "Mr. Malone, please stand." He stood. Frank stood beside him. "You acted without calculation on the night you found this child. That is to your credit. The days that followed involved errors of judgment that are understandable in context, though not without consequence. What is most significant to this court is not the error, but the correction you chose ultimately to place yourself in the hands of a system you had every personal reason to distrust, because you determined it was what the child needed. That demonstrates a quality of character that is difficult to teach and impossible to fabricate for the benefit of a courtroom." She looked at Ellie, who was still in the witness chair with Beth Okafor beside her. "Ellie, you told this court that you know the difference between something shown and something said." "I believe you do." She looked back at the room. "The court orders as follows. Primary custody of Eleanor Hartwell is granted to Thomas Jack Malone, effective immediately upon completion of the requisite home assessment, which the court anticipates will proceed without incident. Diana Hartwell is granted liberal visitations scheduled and flexible to be developed in good faith by both parties. The court further orders that Mrs. Hartwell participate in a family counseling program for a period of no less than 1 year to support rebuilding her relationship with her daughter. This court will retain jurisdiction for annual review. The gavel came down. The room moved. Jack sat down because his legs made the decision for him. Frank gripped his arm. In the gallery, Roy Briggs exhaled with the particular sound of a man who had been holding his breath for longer than he had realized. Ellie slid off the witness chair. She was across the room before Beth Okafor could think to accompany her, threading between the tables, and Jack stood again, and she walked straight into him, and he lifted her off the floor and held her the way you hold something you have been afraid of losing. "Told you," she said, into his shoulder. "You told me." He agreed. His voice was barely there. She pulled back to look at him. "Can we go home?" "Yeah," he said. "We can go home." Diana found them in the hallway outside the courtroom, where the reporters were being kept behind a partition by a courthouse officer. She was alone. Whitmore had gone to arrange something, or perhaps to recalibrate, which might have amounted to the same thing. She looked at Ellie first. "I meant what I said in there," Diana said. Ellie looked at her. "I know. I am going to work on it." "I know that too." Diana glanced at Jack. He held her look without hostility, which was the best he could offer, and he knew it was what she was asking for. "Take care of her," Diana said. "That is the plan," he said. She reached out and touched Ellie's cheek once briefly, and then she walked down the hallway with her spine straight and her heels precise on the marble, and turned the corner and was gone. Ellie watched the space where her mother had been. "She is going to be okay," Ellie said. "It will take a while, but she is going to be okay." Jack looked down at her. "I think you are probably right." "I usually am," she said without any particular pride in it, just as a statement of record. Roy Briggs emerged from the courtroom doors and made his way to them with his thermos and his reading glasses and his weathered face arranged in something that was not quite a smile but was in the neighborhood. "Nice to finally meet the famous Ellie," he said, extending a large hand. Ellie shook it with both of hers very seriously. "You are Roy," she said. "Mr. Jack talks about you. He says you never take unnecessary steps and you make the best cornbread in Lewis and Clark County." Roy looked at Jack. "I did say that," Jack confirmed. "Both statements are accurate," Roy said. He looked at Ellie. "I brought some. It is in the truck. Figured you would want something better than courthouse coffee after all this." Ellie looked up at Jack. "Cornbread," she said. "Let us go," he said. The drive back took 2 hours through country that had softened into late afternoon light, the kind of light that came in winter when the sun was low and everything it touched went gold. The highway ran through open range and then into the long corridor of pines, and the pines gave way to the familiar narrow road that wound the last 4 miles to the property. Roy had driven ahead. His truck was in the clearing when they arrived, and smoke was already rising from the chimney. He had gone ahead to start the fire because that was the kind of person Roy was, quietly practical about other people's comfort. The cabin had been cleaned during the 2 weeks Jack was in custody. A social worker and a county assessor had been through it, along with a contractor the county sent to verify habitability. They had certified it sound and adequate and warm. Frank had forwarded Jack a copy of the assessment with a note that said, "They described it as modest but well-maintained. Coming from county assessors, that is a rave review." Ellie stepped out of the truck and stood in the clearing and looked at the cabin. She had the bird guide in her arms. Captain was in the front pocket of her coat, his one eye visible above the zipper. She stood very still for a moment. Jack stood beside her. The trees were loaded with snow from a storm 2 days prior. The branches bent under it, and when the wind moved through them, the snow came loose in small clouds, and the late light caught it in ways that were almost theatrical. A Clark's nutcracker landed on the fence post at the cabin's edge and tilted its head at them and flew away. "He was checking on us," Ellie said. "I believe it," Jack said. She reached over and took his hand the way she had from almost the beginning. Easy and certain, the way you take the hand of someone you have decided to trust. "Come on," she said. Roy is waiting. That evening, after cornbread and a pot of soup Roy had started before they arrived, after the fire was going well, and the dishes were done, and Roy had pulled on his coat and driven back down the road to his own place with the promise to return Thursday for dinner. Ellie and Jack sat on the porch in the cold, wrapped in blankets, looking at the sky. The stars were very clear. Ellie had the bird guide open on her lap, but she was not reading it. She was looking up. "Mr. Jack," she said. "Yeah." She was quiet for a moment. "Do you think Maria can see us from up there somewhere?" He looked at the sky. He thought about the night he had spoken to her photograph before all of this. He thought about what he had said. "What was I supposed to do?" And the answer he had imagined. "What you did." "Yeah," he said. "I think she probably can." Ellie considered this. "I think she is glad about how things turned out." "Me too," he said. She leaned her head against his arm. The cold was real, and the stars were real, and the warmth where she pressed against his side was real. "Mr. Jack," she said again. "Still here. Can I just call you Dad?" He did not answer right away. He looked at the stars and felt the weight of the word and everything that had led to this porch and this moment and this particular configuration of two people who had found each other in the worst possible weather. He thought about Maria and about the boy who had not made it and about the 3 days that had changed the direction of everything and about the way grief could run underground for years and then surface somewhere unexpected in a clearing in a cabin in the dark eyes of a 6-year-old who had walked into the snow looking for someone who wanted her. He thought about Jimmy Featherstone's mother and her little veil, and about Rex standing at the bottom of the porch steps with the phone in his hand, and about the way the right choice and the hard choice had turned out in the end to be the same choice. He thought about the paper in the drawer, the one with his daughter's name on it, and the word declines, and he thought about how the man who had signed that paper and called himself senator had missed something so entirely that he would spend the rest of his life not knowing the shape of what he had given up. He thought about the field guide to Montana birds and 30,000 seeds and the Clark's nutcracker that always kept track. "Yeah," he said. "You can call me that." She settled in against him. The forest was quiet. The stars turned slowly overhead the way they always did, indifferent and beautiful and old beyond imagining. Below them in a clearing in the pines, a man and a girl sat on a porch wrapped in blankets. Neither of them in any hurry to go inside. They had time now. They had all the time in the world. Spring came slowly to that part of Montana, the snow retreating in increments, grudging and gradual. First from the south-facing slopes, and then from the clearing, and finally from the shadow places under the oldest trees where it held on longest, as if it did not quite believe winter was finished. By March, the creek at the bottom of the East Trail was running hard and loud, carrying the meltdown toward the valley, and by April, the first wildflowers were coming up through the dark soil at the edges of the tree-lined glacier lilies, first pale yellow and improbable. Then the blue commas that Ellie found in the field guide under the heading Early Bloomers, and announced she intended to document in a notebook of her own. Jack found her a notebook at the general store in town, spiral-bound with a green cover that she said matched the cabin. She pressed the first glacier lily between 2 pages of the bird guide to preserve it, then drew it from memory in the notebook with careful attention to the particular droop of the petals, adding a label in her precise 6-year-old printing, Erythronium grandiflorum. Jack had not known that was the scientific name. She had looked it up. Roy came on Thursdays for dinner as promised, and occasionally on other evenings when the road was clear, and he had made something he wanted company to eat. He and Ellie had established a rapport that Jack found quietly extraordinary, the old ranger and the small girl speaking to each other with the mutual seriousness of equals, comparing notes on bird sightings and animal tracks and the behavior of the creek at different water levels. Roy had 65 more years of observation than she did, and shared them without condescension. Ellie had an attention to detail that Roy found genuinely impressive, and said so, which Ellie received with the particular grace of someone who had been waiting for their specific gift to be recognized. She was enrolled in the 2nd grade at the elementary school in town, a decision that had required paperwork and a home assessment, and 2 conversations with the school principal. A brisk woman named Mrs. Gartland, who had reviewed Jack's background with professional thoroughness, and then looked at Ellie and asked her what she was reading, and received a 10-minute response about the Clark's Nutcracker spatial memory and the evolutionary advantages of scatter hoarding that had settled the question. Jack drove her to school every morning in the truck. He waited with her at the entrance until the bell rang, not because she needed him to, but because he liked to, and because on most mornings she used the waiting time to tell him things about what she had been thinking about on the drive, about something she had read the night before about the particular behavior of a bird she had noticed at the feeder he had hung from the porch eave. He had started the feeder because of the field guide. She had noted very precisely that many of the birds in the guide were present in their part of Montana, and that a feeder with appropriate seed mix would attract several species worth observing. He had built it on a Sunday afternoon from scrap lumber, Ellie handing him tools and asking questions about the joints, and hung it where it would catch the morning light. By the following week, it was visited regularly by mountain chickadees and red-breasted nuthatches, and twice by a pine grosbeak, with a color so saturated it seemed improbable in the gray winter air. Ellie had recorded each visit in her notebook with the date and time and a small sketch of the bird. He had put her drawings on the refrigerator, held up by the same magnets that held his work schedule and the grocery list in the school calendar. The drawings covered most of the surface. He had not moved the work schedule to make room for them. He had moved the work schedule. There were things that were harder than he had anticipated and things that were easier. The harder things, the weight of legal procedures, the visits from the county social worker who came quarterly to verify conditions, the low-grade vigilance he kept about his own behavior in public. Not paranoia, just awareness. The knowledge that he was watched in a way that fathers without his history were not, and that the watching was reasonable, and he had no argument with it. The easier things, almost everything else. He had expected the daily presence of a child to feel like effort, the way he expected everything unfamiliar to feel like work, like discipline, like a thing to be managed. Instead, it felt like weather. She was simply there, part of the atmosphere of the place, and the place was better for it in ways he had not anticipated. The cabin felt inhabited in a way it had not before. The mornings had a shape. The evenings had a shape. He cooked because there was someone to cook for, and the cooking got better because she noticed things and commented on them without judgment. This soup is good, but I think it wants more time. And he incorporated the observations because she was correct, and also because it was pleasant to cook for someone who paid attention. She had nightmares occasionally in the first few months. She never described them in detail, but he could tell when she had them because she would appear in the doorway of his room in the early hours, her hair disordered and captain held against her chest, and stand there until he said, "Come on," and she crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed, and he would read to her from the field guide, from the Atlas of North American Mammals he had ordered from the bookstore in town until she fell back to sleep. And then he would carry her back to her room and put her under her blanket and go back to bed himself. After 3 months, the nightmares became infrequent. After 5 months, they stopped. He had nightmares of his own still. They were not new. They had been part of his sleep for years, since before he left the club, since before Maria. He had learned to live with them the way you learn to live with a scar, not ignoring it, not dramatizing it, just acknowledging that it was there and that it did not define the waking hours. What was different now was that the waking hours had more in them. That was what he had not anticipated. The density of ordinary days when you were doing them with someone who found everything worth noticing. Diana came on the second Saturday of every month. The visits had been awkward, at first formally scheduled, supervised by Beth Okafor in the early months, conducted at a park in town with a studied casualness that neither Diana nor Ellie managed to sustain naturally. But by the third visit, Ellie had begun to ask Diana questions about things she had been curious about, questions she had been saving since she was old enough to wonder about them, and Diana had answered them with a honesty that surprised Jack, who had been present at a discreet distance on a park bench with a cup of coffee. She told Ellie about her own childhood, which had not been prosperous. A small apartment in Spokane. A mother who worked 2 jobs, the particular ambition that comes from watching someone you love be exhausted by scarcity. She told her about meeting Ellie's father in law school and about what she had believed then versus what she had come to understand later. She told her about the counseling program she was attending, about what it was like to spend an hour a week with someone whose job was to ask you questions you had been avoiding. It is strange, Diana said. I kept thinking I did not have time for it, and then I kept going anyway. And now I think I did not have time not to. Ellie had listened to all of this with the quality of attention she brought to everything, and then said, I am glad you are doing it, Mommy. And Diana had looked at her daughter and said quietly, me too. By summer, the visits had extended naturally without formal amendment to full Saturdays, and then to occasional overnight stays at a rental property Diana had taken in Helena 30 miles from the cabin. Ellie came back from these visits and reported on them with the same precision she applied to bird sightings. Mommy made pancakes. She sang to the radio a little. She is still off key. Jack had said that was a good sign, and Ellie had agreed. It was on a Tuesday in late June, ordinary and warm, that Jack was at the workbench outside the cabin, sharpening a plane blade when he heard the truck come up the road. He recognized the engine. Roy's truck had a particular exhaust note, and then recognized that it was not Roy's truck, the engine slightly smaller, the tire sound different on the gravel. He set down the sharpening stone. The truck that came around the corner of the tree line was a county vehicle, plain and white. Beth Okafor stepped out of the driver's side, and on the passenger side, stepping down with the careful deliberateness of someone who has been sitting a long time, was a man in his late 60s that Jack did not recognize. Ellie came around from the back of the cabin where she had been documenting a new bloom in her notebook and stopped. The man looked at her. He was not a large man. He was the kind of man who had probably once projected authority through manner rather than presence, the kind of person who learned early how to make rooms organize themselves around him, and who was now encountering, for what Jack suspected was one of the first times, a situation that did not organize itself on request. He was Gareth Hartwell. Jack had known this visit was coming in the way that you know certain things without being told. The legal settlement had provisions for it, carefully worded clauses about biological paternal contact at the minor child's discretion. He had not told Ellie it was scheduled because he did not know if it would actually happen, and because he believed that some things were best encountered without preamble. Ellie looked at her father for a long moment. She had her notebook in one hand and a pencil in the other. She was wearing her red boots and the jacket with the small patches on the elbows that Jack had sewn on when the original fabric wore through. Her hair was in two braids because she had asked him to learn how to do them, and he had practiced on a Saturday until he had it right. She looked at the man who had signed his full name on a piece of paper and put her in the category of declined. She said, hello. Gareth Hartwell said, hello, Eleanor. No one called her Eleanor. She did not correct him. She stood and waited with the patience of someone who had learned that waiting often told you more than asking. He said, I know I do not deserve for you to be glad to see me. She said, no. He said, I wanted you to know that I understand that, and that I made mistakes I cannot undo, and that I am sorry. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, I accept that, but I have a dad now. She turned and looked at Jack, who had not moved from the workbench. She turned back. You can visit if you want, she said, but you should know it is going to be strange for a while because you are basically a stranger to me. And you should know that I am not going to pretend it is okay when it is not. I am honest about things. Gareth Hartwell looked at his daughter, at this small person in red boots with a notebook and a pencil, and the particular composure of someone who had been through things and come out with her sense of herself intact, and he nodded. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. She went back around the cabin to finish her documentation of the new bloom. Beth Okafor stood by the truck with the careful neutrality of someone doing her job. Gareth Hartwell stood in the clearing and looked at nothing in particular for a long moment, and then looked at Jack. Jack looked back. He is taking care of her, Gareth said. It was not quite a question. Jack said, I am. Gareth nodded once, and he got back in the passenger side of the truck. Beth Okafor caught Jack's eye briefly before she got in the driver's side. She gave him a small nod. He gave one back. The truck drove back down the road and out of sight. Ellie came back around the corner of the cabin a few minutes later. She had a new sketch in her notebook, a Columbine, Jack thought, though he was still learning. She stood beside him at the workbench. That was hard, she said, but I think it needed to happen. Yeah, Jack said, I think so too. She looked at the road where the truck had gone. I do not hate him, she said. It is harder than hating would be. Jack put down the plane blade. He looked at her. That is the honest way of it, he said. She nodded. She opened her notebook to a fresh page and started a new sketch, the pencil moving with precision across the paper. He picked up the sharpening stone. They worked in the afternoon light, not needing to say anything else. The summer moved forward the way summers do in that part of Montana, unhurried, generous with its light, the days long, and the evenings slow. Ellie finished her first field note and started a second, which she asked Jack to label for her with a strip of masking tape on the cover, Field Observations Volume 2, which she then decorated with a small drawing of a Clark's nutcracker. The bird had become something of a symbol between them, the creature that kept track of everything that never forgot, where it had hidden its supply that operated on a kind of memory that science was still trying to fully understand. She attended a summer nature program at the county park on Tuesdays and Thursdays, run by a retired biology teacher named Mr. Addison, who had a way of talking about organisms that made everything sound like it was in the middle of doing something interesting. Ellie came home from these sessions and reported extensively. Jack developed opinions about organisms he had previously not considered. Roy took her fishing on the creek one Saturday morning in July, a planned expedition with real poles and proper lures and a thermos of hot chocolate, and she caught a cutthroat trout on her second cast and released it carefully with both hands, watching it hold still for a moment in the cold, clear water and then move away. She said, I wanted to keep it, but it seemed wrong. Roy said, usually does. She said, I understand now why you always say to take only what you need. Roy said, take some people their whole lives to get there. She said, I think I had good teachers. Roy looked at the creek for a moment. He said, that is probably true. In September, she started third grade 1 year ahead of her age cohort, a placement that Mrs. Gartland had recommended after reviewing her work from the previous year. Ellie received this news with the calm of someone who had been expecting it and had already begun reading ahead. She made a friend that fall, a girl named June, whose family had a small horse operation on the eastern edge of the county, and who shared Ellie's quality of focused attention, directing it toward horses the way Ellie directed it toward birds. They spent alternating weekends at each other's places, and Jack found himself navigating the specific logistics of child social life with the same methodical approach he applied to mechanical problems. What does this situation require? What do I have? How do I get from the first to the second? He was not always graceful about it, but he showed up, which Ellie told him once was most of what it required. He asked, what is the rest of it? She thought about it seriously. Paying attention, she said, and being honest, and not pretending things are okay when they are not. He said, I can do those things. She said, I know, you already do. October brought the first frost, and then the first real snow lighter than the winter before, and Ellie marked both in her notebook with dates and temperatures that she had started recording from the outdoor thermometer Jack had mounted on the porch rail. She had begun keeping a kind of log weather bird sightings animal tracks, notable events that had evolved from the field notebook into something more like a journal, though she did not call it that. On the evening of the first snowfall, she came to where he was reading in the armchair by the fire and handed him the journal open to the day's entry. He read it. She had written in the careful printing that had become increasingly confident over the past year. First snow of second winter at the cabin, 3 inches by nightfall. Chickadee at feeder 4:15 p.m. Dad and I sat on the porch and watched it come down. He made hot chocolate with the good cocoa. I think this is what home is supposed to feel like. I am keeping track so I do not forget. He sat with the journal for a moment. Then he handed it back to her. Good entry, he said. His voice was steady. He had learned to keep his voice steady. She took the journal and looked at the entry herself as if verifying something. I wanted to write it down while it was still happening, she said. Roy says memory is unreliable, but documentation lasts. Roy is right, Jack said. She nodded. She closed the journal and went back to her room, and he heard the small sounds of her settling in for the night, the creak of her bed, the particular thump that was Captain being set on the pillow, the silence that meant she was reading. He sat by the fire. He thought about documentation and what lasts. He thought about the photographs on the wall, Maria laughing in front of the lake, and the white cross between them, and the way grief had a weight that did not decrease, but that you learned to carry differently, redistributing it until it no longer pulled you off balance. He thought about the night he had found a small person in the snow and made a choice that was not really a choice because some things present themselves with such clarity that the question of what to do answers itself. He thought about Jimmy Featherstone's mother and her veil, and about the night on the porch when Rex had set a phone on the railing and walked away, and about the moment in the second cabin when he had picked up that phone and dialed. He thought about Frank Delaney in the parking lot teaching him to tie a tie. He thought about Roy showing up with cornbread. He thought about Judge Owenines and the cloth she used to polish her glasses and the words she had chosen which he had memorized without meaning to. You chose ultimately to place yourself in the hands of a system you had every personal reason to distrust because you determined it was what the child needed. He thought about the word dead and the way it had sounded in Ellie's voice on the porch that first winter night, and the way he had said yeah, and how after everything, all of it, every choice and error and correction and ordinary Thursday, that was still the truest thing he had said. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Inside, the fire burned low and steady. He was not going anywhere. The second winter settled over the cabin differently than the first. The first winter had been the winter of emergency, of cold and pursuit and uncertainty, of days measured by what might happen next. The second winter was simply winter with its ordinary demands and its ordinary gifts, the darkness coming earlier, and the mornings requiring more convincing. Jack had insulated the north wall of the cabin in October, a project that took a long weekend and several phone calls to Roy, whose experience with old construction was encyclopedic and patiently shared. He had also replaced two of the windows with double-pane glass, which Ellie supervised with the seriousness of a project manager, recording each step in her journal, and noting at the end, new windows make the cabin much quieter at night. Also warmer. Dad says the improvement was overdue. I think he says things are overdue when he means he wishes he had done them sooner. I believe this is called understatement. He had read the entry as he read all her entries when she handed him the journal and had said that is a fair characterization. She had said, I thought so. She was 7 now. Her birthday had been in November, a Saturday, and Roy had come for dinner, and Diana had driven up from Helena, and they had eaten pot roast and a cake that Jack had made from scratch, using a recipe he found in a paperback cookbook at the library sale, a chocolate cake that was not quite level, and whose frosting he had applied with more enthusiasm than finesse, but which tasted correct, which Ellie said was the most important thing about a cake. Diana had agreed with this, and it was the first time Jack had heard the two of them agree about something spontaneously without anyone arranging for it, and it had felt like the beginning of something. After dinner, Roy had given Ellie a compass, a real one, brass and precise, with a card that said, "For a girl who always knows where she is going." Jack had given her the complete set of a field guide series, birds, mammals, insects, wildflowers, in matching editions, which she had received with an expression of such complete happiness that he had to look at the fire for a moment. Diana had given her a camera, a small digital one that was robust enough for outdoor use and had said so you can document things more precisely. Ellie had looked at the camera and then at her mother and said, "This is perfect, actually." The camera had been in daily use since November. She photographed birds at the feeder tracks in the fresh snow, the particular quality of light through ice-covered branches. She photographed Roy's hands when he was tying flies, which she said showed the character of someone who spent a long time doing careful things. She photographed the cabin from different distances and angles, building a record of its changing appearance through the seasons. She photographed Jack at the workbench, which he objected to on the grounds that he was not a landscape, and she said that people could be documentation too, and he did not have a good counter-argument. She printed the best photographs at the drugstore in town and added them to her journals, annotated in pencil with dates and weather conditions and brief observations about what she had been thinking when she took them. He looked through the journal sometimes when she was at school and the cabin was quiet. Not out of surveillance, she knew he did it and had told him she did not mind that she wrote things the way she wrote them, regardless of who might read them, which was the only honest way to write. He looked through them because they were the clearest record he had of what she was becoming, which was something he wanted to pay attention to. She was becoming as best he could tell herself, which was a thing she had always been, but which was now less crowded by uncertainty and more able to take up the space it required. She had opinions about things and expressed them directly. She had questions about things and pursued them until she had answers. She had a distinct and consistent moral sense that she applied. Without drama, she believed in honesty, and she believed in fairness, and she believed in taking only what you need, which she had adapted from Roy's fishing philosophy into something more general, a principle she applied to attention and space and other people's time as well as to natural resources. She forgave things, but she did not pretend. When she was hurt, she said so precisely, and then she moved on, which was different from burying it. He had asked her about this once, how she distinguished between moving on and burying things. She had thought about it carefully. Moving on is when you understand what happened and decide it does not have to keep happening, she said. Burying is when you understand what happened and pretend you do not. One is free and one is not. He had thought about this for a long time afterward. He thought about it now in the second winter, sitting by the fire, while the snow came down outside and the cabin was warm and the feeder was stocked with sunflower seed, and she was in her room reading ahead in the science textbook she had already finished twice. He was not sure he had always known the difference. He thought there were things he had buried rather than moved on from, and that the difference had cost him quietly and for a long time. He thought the process of learning to move on properly was something that happened gradually and required examples, and that she had been, without knowing it, one of his examples. He thought about Maria and about the grief that had run underground for years, and about the way it had surfaced, not as devastation, not in the end, but as something he could carry and still walk with. He thought the carrying was different now than it had been. The weight was the same. The way he held it had changed. He thought that Maria would have liked Ellie very much. He thought they would have talked about birds and about honesty and about the specific comfort of a bowl of soup when you were cold through. He thought they would have understood each other immediately in the way that certain people did, recognizing something in each other that they did not often encounter. He had told Ellie this once, and she had said, "I would have liked her too. I can tell from the photographs." She had eyes like someone who was paying attention. He had said she did. Ellie had said, "I try to have eyes like that. It is something you can practice." He had said, "I think you are doing fine." She had tilted her head and looked at him. "Dad," she said, "you do not have to qualify everything." He had smiled at that. She was right. December brought the cold in earnest, and then the specific stillness that preceded the deepest part of winter, when the forest at night was so quiet you could hear the snow settling. Ellie marked this in her journal, "Second winter, deep cold." The kind of quiet that feels like something listening. Dad says this part of the season has a different quality than any other. I agree. It is not lonely quiet. It is the other kind. He had read that entry and wondered what she meant by the other kind. He asked her. She thought about it. "It is the quiet that means everything is okay," she said. "Not the absence of things, just the rest between things, like in music." She considered. "Mrs. Paulson says the rests are part of the music. The silence is not nothing. It is still the peace." He sat with this for a moment. "That is a good way to put it," he said. She shrugged, which was how she received compliments she agreed with. He had learned not to say too much. On Christmas Eve, they made soup together, which had become their tradition. The same chicken broth with egg noodles and soft carrots that he had made the first night, which she said was the original and therefore the definitive, and any deviation was subject to editorial review. They made it side by side at the small stove, her on the step stool she used when she wanted to be at counter height, him managing the stock pot. She chopped the carrots with the concentration she brought to precise work, the knife moving with careful deliberateness, and he watched her out of the corner of his eye and thought about the first night and about how far both of them had come from it. She caught him watching. "You are doing the thing," she said. "What thing?" "The thinking about where we started thing." She did not look up from the carrots. "You get a particular expression." He said, "And what expression is that?" She said, like something is more than you expected. He said, it is. She nodded as if this confirmed something she had known. They ate the soup by the fire the same way as the first year, and afterward they sat together on the couch under the heavy blanket, and she read aloud to him from the field guide section on winter behavior. How animals manage the cold, what strategies different species used, the remarkable insulation properties of certain feathers, the metabolic adjustments of hibernation. She had started reading aloud to him in the fall, reversing the original arrangement which she said was fair, because he had read to her first and it was reasonable to take turns. He liked being read to. He had not known that about himself. He liked the sound of her voice and the way she paused at interesting facts to look at him over the top of the book, checking whether he had registered the things she found worth noting. After the field guide, she asked him to tell her something he had not told her before. He thought about it. He told her about the first time he had been to Montana, 19 years old, riding with two friends on a trip that had no particular destination, just the desire to go somewhere that felt large enough. They had come over the pass in early October, and the mountains had been so unexpected, so entirely different in scale from anything he had grown up with, that he had pulled over on the roadside and stood there for several minutes saying nothing, which was unusual for him at 19. She said, what did it feel like? He said, like being small, but in a good way, like being the right size for once. She said, I understand that. I feel that way in the forest sometimes, like the scale is correct and I am exactly where I am supposed to be. He said, yeah. She said, is that why you came back here to Montana? He said, partly, and partly because there was nowhere else I could imagine being myself that I had not already tried. She said, and now he looked around the cabin, the photographs, the drawings on the refrigerator, the two pairs of boots by the door, the feeder just visible through the window in the darkness, the stack of journals on her shelf, the compass Roy had given her sitting on the windowsill where she could see it from her bed. Now he said, I am exactly where I am supposed to be. She nodded and leaned against his arm, and they sat in the good silence. The kind that was not the absence of things but the rest between them, and outside the snow fell steadily on the forest, in the clearing and the path between the trees and the road that led to town, and the world beyond it, and the cabin held its warmth, and the fire held its light, and they held their ground. Roy came the next morning with cornbread in a box he had wrapped himself in paper that had a repeating pattern of pine trees. Inside was a copy of a book he had read 3 times himself, the complete journals of a 19th century naturalist who had spent 7 years mapping the wildlife of the Northern Rockies and had written about it with the exact combination of scientific precision and wondering attention that Ellie brought to her own observations. Roy had found it at a used bookshop in Missoula and written on the inside front cover in his spare handwriting, "For Ellie who pays attention. From Roy, who tries to." She read the inscription twice and held the book carefully. She said, this is the best present I have ever received. Roy said, you said that last year. She said, both things can be true. He said, I suppose they can. They ate around the table, the three of them, and the conversation moved the way it did when they were all together, ranging and unhurried, touching on things of genuine interest, and sometimes doubling back to examine them from a different angle. Ellie had questions about a passage in the naturalist journals that she had already begun reading, which led to a discussion of how field observation techniques had changed over the past century, which led to a discussion of what technology made easier and what it made harder, which led to a consideration of what things were worth preserving and what things were better replaced, which led, as their conversations often did, to something that seemed on the surface to be about nature, but was actually about something else, about how to live, about what the necessary things were and how to recognize them. Ellie said, I think the necessary things are the ones you would notice if they were gone. Roy said, what things would you notice? She thought about it carefully. The quiet, she said, the feeder in the morning, soup that is made from scratch, the field guide. Good questions. She looked at the two of them. People who tell the truth. Roy said those are good necessaries. She said, what would you notice, Roy? He said similar things, and coffee, and conversation worth having. She said, Dad, he thought about it the way she asked him to think about things properly without deflecting. He said this, what we are doing right now. He looked at the table, the 3 cups, the cornbread, the winter light through the window. All of it. She looked at him for a moment with those dark, steady eyes. She said, that is a good answer. He said, I had a good teacher. She accepted this with the particular grace of someone who understood they had been given something real. The afternoon was clear and very cold. After Roy left, they walked the East Trail together, following the creek downstream toward the place where it widened into a small beaver pond that was frozen solid now, the ice clear enough at the edges to see the dark water moving slowly beneath it. Ellie photographed the ice with the small camera, noting in her journal afterward the particular quality of light that came through it in the way the moving water below was visible as a darker suggestion present but invisible. On the way back, she asked him something she had been building toward. He could tell for most of the walk. She said, do you think we are happy? He said, what do you think? She said, I think we are. But I want to know if you think so too. Sometimes I am not sure if I am reading things correctly. He said, you are reading them correctly. She said, you are sure? He said, yes. She walked for a few steps. She said, I asked because I was not happy before. I remember what that felt like. And I want to make sure I am not confusing the absence of that with the presence of this. He thought about this carefully because she had asked it carefully and it deserved that. He said the absence of unhappiness and the presence of happiness are not the same thing. You are right to make the distinction. He considered, what we have is the second one. What you had before was neither, it was something smaller than either a kind of numbness that felt like nothing because it had been going on so long. She said, how do you know the difference? He said, you notice things. When you are numb, nothing catches. When you are unhappy, too many things catch. When you are happy, not the surface kind, the real kind things catch in the right proportion. You notice the soup and the quiet and the feeder and Roy's handwriting in the front of a book, and each of those things is exactly as large as it should be, not too large and not too small. She walked beside him for a moment. She said, yes, that is it exactly. He said, I know. She said, when did you start being happy, the real kind? He thought about it honestly. He said, I think it started the morning I watched you stack firewood, and you did it more carefully than I did. She made a small sound that was close to laughing. She said, you were watching. He said, I was watching. She said, I did not know that. He said, I know. They walked the last stretch of trail in the good quiet, their boots on the packed snow, the trees around them holding their winter stillness. The cabin came into view between the pines, its chimney smoke rising straight in the cold air because the wind had stopped entirely. The feeder was visible at the edge of the porch, and as they approached, a chickadee landed on it, and then another, and then a third. Ellie stopped and photographed them. He waited beside her. When she was done, she looked at the photograph on the small screen, checking focus. She said, good. He said, all 3 of them. She said, all 3. They went inside out of the cold into the warmth that was theirs, that they had made and maintained and returned to and would return to again through this winter and the ones that followed through all the ordinary and extraordinary days that lay ahead of them, through the full and complex length of a life being lived on honest terms by 2 people who had found each other in the worst possible weather and had decided with their whole hearts to stay. Spring came a second time, and with it, the glacier lilies, again pale yellow and improbable at the edge of the tree line. And Ellie photographed them and pressed one between 2 pages of her 3rd field notebook and added it to the documentation alongside the entry from the year before so that the 2 could be compared, which she said was one of the purposes of keeping records. Not just to remember what had happened, but to see how one thing related to another across time. She was working on a project for school, a long study of the ecology of the creek and its watershed using observation data she had been collecting since the fall. Mr. Addison, her science teacher, now had told her it was the most thorough student field study he had seen in 30 years of teaching, which she had received with a characteristic combination of satisfaction and continued focus. She thanked him and asked what she might add to make it more complete. Jack had helped her mount a small weather station on the porch railing, a modest instrument that recorded temperature and precipitation and wind direction, and she had integrated its data into her study with a precision that surprised even him, who had started to think himself immune to being surprised by her. The Creek study ran to 47 pages by April. She bounded herself with supplies from the art store in town, a green cover to match her notebooks, and submitted it in a manila envelope that she sealed and addressed herself. She said the evening after she submitted it, "I am glad I did that, regardless of what they think of it." He said, "Why?" She said, "Because it was the most accurate account I could produce. It told the truth about the Creek. That feels like enough." He said, "It is enough." She said, "You always say things are enough." He said, "I say things are enough when they are enough." She considered this. She said, "I think you are right more often than not." He said, "I will take that." She went back to her reading. The Creek study won a regional science competition in May, which brought a letter and a certificate and an invitation to present at a symposium in Billings that fall, which Ellie accepted with a gravity appropriate to the occasion, and then immediately began thinking about how to improve the study before the presentation date. Roy said when he heard, "I told you she was something." Jack said, "You did." Roy said, "Did you doubt it?" Jack said, "Not for a minute." Roy looked at his coffee. He said, "You have done well, Jack. Not perfectly, but well." Jack said, "She has done most of it." Roy said, "She had the material. You gave her somewhere to put it." Jack sat with this. He said, "Maria would have liked you, Roy." Roy said, "I expect I would have liked her too." They sat on the porch in the warm May evening, listening to the creek and the birds and the sound of Ellie inside moving between her room and the kitchen with the quiet industry of someone pursuing a purpose. Roy said, "Do you feel like you are where you are supposed to be?" Jack said, "Yes, for the first time in a very long time." Roy said, "Good." He said, "I thought you would get there. I just did not know it would be like this." Jack said, "Like what?" Roy said, "This good." A silence came over them that was the kind Roy had once described to Ellie as the rest between things. Not the absence of something, but its completion, the moment in the music that was still the peace. Above them, the sky went from pale blue to the first warm colors of sunset, and the pines stood dark against it, and the cabin behind them held its warmth, and inside it, Ellie was writing something in her journal, adding to the record she was keeping of a life that had found its shape. He thought this is what it means to have come through something. Not unscathed, he had scars, she had scars they both carried, things that would always be part of the weight they held. But through, on the other side, in the space that opened up when you stopped running and turned to face the thing that had been chasing you and found that it was smaller than you had believed, or that you were larger, or that the two of you could coexist on terms that did not require your destruction. He thought about the night in the snow, the headlight cutting through the dark, the shape of a small person lying still in the white. He thought about all the ways it could have gone differently, all the points at which a different choice would have bent the line of events away from this porch this evening, this particular configuration of warmth and company in genuine life. He thought I made the right ones, not all of them, but the ones that mattered. He thought she made some of them for me when I could not see them clearly myself. He thought that is what it means to be a father and a daughter, maybe. Not the blood, not the legal designation, but the way you watch each other's blind spots and fill them in quietly without needing to make a production of it, the way you keep each other oriented. Inside the cabin, Ellie's pen moved across the page. He could not hear it, not really, but he knew it was moving. He had a sense for it now, the rhythm of her attention, the particular texture of her focus. The door opened. She came out with 2 cups, cocoa for herself, coffee for him, and set them on the porch railing and leaned against the post and looked at the sky. She said the Milky Way will be visible in about 2 hours if the cloud cover holds. Roy said, "Is that so?" She said, "I have been tracking clear nights. This is the 4th this month. Statistical likelihood of a 5th is high." Roy said, "Then we should wait." She said, "I thought we might." She went back inside and came back with a blanket and draped it over Roy's shoulders without ceremony, the way she did things that needed doing directly without preamble because they were the obvious right thing. Roy said, "Thank you." She said, "You always forget a layer." Roy said, "I always do." She came and stood beside Jack, her shoulder against his arm, Looking at the sky, the way she had looked at it that first winter night on the porch with the quality of someone who found the act of looking worthwhile in itself independent of what might be found. She said, "Dad." He said, "Yeah." She said, "I am glad it snowed that night." He looked down at her. She said, "The specific night when I walked out." He said, "I know which night you mean." She said, "I know you do." She was quiet for a moment. "I am glad the phone was dead and the road was impassable and that you made the choice you made." She said it plainly the way she said things that were true. "I know it was hard and I know it cost you things, but I am glad." He said, "Me too." She leaned against him. The sky overhead had deepened to a true dark, the first stars coming clear, at the zenith bright and steady against the vast surrounding space. Below them the forest held its silence, and below the forest the creek ran over its stones, keeping the record of everything that passed through it, carrying the melt toward the valley, moving as it always had, and would indifferent, inessential, and full of the specific kind of life that does not require an audience, that persists because it persists. That is worth noticing. Because noticing is one of the good things we are here to do. Roy finished his coffee. He said, 2 hours, you said. Ellie said approximately. He said, "Then I am going to close my eyes for a while." He pulled the blanket closer and settled in his chair and was asleep in 4 minutes, which was a skill he had developed over 70 years of outdoor life, and which Ellie had noted in her journal as Roy can sleep anywhere he decides to sleep, which seems like an underrated form of freedom. They stood in the quiet together. After a while, she said, "What are you thinking about?" He said, "All of it." She said, "That is a lot to think about." He said, "Yeah." She said, "Is it good or bad?" He said, "It is good." She said, "All of it." He thought about it properly. He said, "Almost all of it. The parts that were not good were the parts that led here. So even those." She was quiet for a moment. She said, "Yes, that is exactly right." She reached over and took his hand the way she had from almost the beginning, easy and certain, the way you take the hand of someone you have decided to trust and have found to be worth trusting. And they stood together on the porch of the cabin in the pines and waited for the stars to come fully clear. And the waiting was good, and the finding was good, and the space between the two was good, and the whole of it, the long thread of it from the snow to this moment and forward into whatever came next, was something worth keeping track of. Ellie kept track. That was what she did. That was one of the things she was here to do. And he was here to be the one she was keeping track with. The stars came clear. They were both there to see it.